Welcome back to the Crafty Conversation with me, Marcus Sharrod. I'm joined today by an old colleague, long friend and mentor from the beginning of my career, John McKenzie, who is about to step into a new role as senior leadership as an assistant head of co-curricular at the grammar school at Leeds, where John has spent all of your career.
That's right, yeah. So 24 years.
John's just about to finish his 24th year at Leeds Grammar School originally, and then the grammar school at Leeds, ECT years, first 2 years in that department, and learned so much from such great professionals there. Shout to Paul Morris as well, who was my director of sport, and Martin Knowles in the department at the time. John has quite a strong background from a coaching and playing perspective in rugby union, having played for Worcester Warriors all the way through age group into senior rugby, and has level 4 now.
That's right.
Level 4 coaching qualification, and was both fortunate and unfortunate enough to be selected as the head coach of the England Counties pathway under 18 level, having coached the backs for a couple of seasons. He got appointed into the big job in 2020, and by naming the date, we can probably all guess how that went from there. And unfortunately, funding hasn't come back from the RFU into that programme. So John was never able to coach at that level, though he would have done an incredible job doing so. John has also been director of sport at the grammar school at Leeds for the last 2 and a bit years, before he's obviously about to move into this new elevated role as assistant head co-curricular. We're going to be covering a range of different topics today, from learning design through our coaching practice and curriculum to learning environments, both in the classroom and out on the sports field. I'm really excited to have you on. Macca, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here, mate. Thank you.
So as I do with every guest, and you've been given a heads up in advance, interested to know what you consider your craft to be.
Probably a bit cliche from a teaching point of view, but I think fundamentally it's supporting the growth in others. So for a lot of my career, that's been children. It's been the pupils who I've particularly been supporting. And then latterly, it's been my colleagues in the department. So that's obviously needed a different approach at times. Certainly different tactics and different means of doing that. And moving into the SLT role in September, I think that's going to be another tweak to that form of support, particularly because, at the moment I'm working with colleagues who are all in the PE department, and actually supporting colleagues who are, head of music, head of drama, head of CCF, head of faith, etc. That's going to be a very different kind of skill set. But yeah, absolutely, that notion of trying to bring the very best out of the people that you're working with.
What's the difference between bringing the best out of children and bringing the best out of colleagues in your experience?
Yeah, I think for so many children that you work with, it's introducing techniques, ideas, concepts. It's then giving them the opportunity to grow through, be it experimentation, guided discovery, or that direct, deliberate practice of how you're working with children. They're also going from a position where, in most cases, they don't know the answers, and therefore it's trying to learn and extrapolate what that might look like through the way that you teach them. Whereas I think from the colleagues' point of view, in many cases they already know, but they need that support in bringing out the best way of doing that. Sometimes that's, it's talking about a new concept, a new way of doing something completely. But in many cases, I've found with my colleagues, it's actually just been helping them grow through refining those 1-2% rather than, wholesale changes.
How do you think you best approach as a leader who's trying to impart some form of learning and growth in a colleague versus a pupil? Because as you say, the pupil's there to learn. That's the purpose of their schooling. How does one best approach, in your experience, the way that you package that growth and development when we are only talking about certain percents, or when actually from a sense of from an agency perspective, the colleague feels that they have more of an ability to kind of rebuke what you're saying and come back at you?
Yeah, I think in both cases it's trying to individualize that support. If you're working with a pupil as an individual and catering for their unique needs, it's no dissimilar really to the way that you work with your direct colleagues in that way. So knowing the people is a big part of, I think, the way that I approach leadership. So investing time with people is a big way of doing that, and that's far easier with my department, with the colleagues that I work with alongside, versus the pupil who I might see once a week for a 40-minute lesson. But nonetheless, I think still that notion of individualizing the support that you get, knowing the person, having an understanding of how they tick, what sort of things motivate them, what sort of things challenge them, but at the same point, what potentially would be a hazard to that. I think we can both consider situations where you've tried to support somebody and it's gone the wrong way, and through no fault of either party. But I would probably say, with hindsight, knowing the individual better would have, would have countered that potential problem. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that part. Getting to know what makes somebody tick, what their background is, what their morals are, what motivates them, to then really find out how far can you try and push that growth. And within pupils, you've got that range of somebody who's at the beginning of their journey versus somebody who's maybe representing their country in their sport. Individualizing that growth is going to take on a different concept depending on those two scenarios, and likewise with the colleagues, somebody who's at the beginning of their career, somebody who's at the back end of their career.
And as an elite level coach and someone who is in a leadership role, how do you project that kind of you build that rapport and get to know how someone ticks in busy work environments, be it in a championship or premiership level rugby team where your multidisciplinary team is 20 odd people, and everyone's busy and everyone's doing their day to day, or be it in a school where you've got 4 periods to teach and marking to do, and then you're going out to do your cricket coaching this afternoon, or in a corporate environment where you've got meetings backed up and then you've got a proposal you need to write. How does a leader find the time to connect with others from a learning environment perspective?
I think when I was doing the representative coaching, it was really beneficial having a team around me that could do part of that process for me. So what I mean by that is the doctor, the medic, the physio were probably most instrumental in supporting that understanding of the people, because the players would confide in them in a different way. They would be far more prepared to be vulnerable. You've just arrived in an England camp. So actually going back to 2020, we had a camp down at Worcester Warriors. So it was lovely going back to my old stomping ground.
Yeah, close the loop.
We selected our first squad. Yeah, absolutely. So we selected our first squad, really excited with what we had. And there's a lad called Paul Brown-Bampo who's tearing it up for Exeter at the moment. So he was selected on the right wing for us. So a great virtue of the system to recognise that even though he was in a team that didn't actually perform, it was part of his pathway to realising his potential and getting to where he is now. And I think he's been pretty highly tipped for great things, is Paul. So but yeah, absolutely, that support mechanism of the people around you, to help understand the bits that you didn't have the time or the opportunity, or maybe that the person didn't feel as completely comfortable and open with passing on that vulnerability. Because we would then have met as our staff group, we'd have had a bit of a breakdown of how those conversations went. We actually started with like a speed dating exercise with all the players. So the management team, the coaches, we met every player for like a 2-minute conversation, and they had to ask various questions and so on. It was great fun, really broke the ice well. We then had our sort of review meeting that night, and as the staff, we were able to almost identify, okay, who came across as uber confident, who looks like they can be pushed and challenged in a particular way, versus who's the sort of the shrinking violet who's really a little bit intimidated by this environment, and therefore needs that proverbial arm around the shoulder, and actually might need a physical arm around the shoulder. Those are the bits that you sort of found out there. So I think that was a great learning curve for me, is seeing that environment, and finding different ways of learning about people. Now, if I look at my day job of teaching PE as with yourself, you have a limited window of opportunity for finding out that information. Now, you find out other stuff through their friends. There'll be the sort of the pastoral mechanisms that can help facilitate that. But really, I just think you underestimate the little conversations that you can have, and whether that's walking to the playing field and you're chatting to somebody else, making sure that it's somebody else, that you're not gravitating always towards the same people, and just being open to the pupils around you, which I think in no dissimilar way represents where I am with my department and with the colleagues. You have regular conversations with certain people because of their specific role, but actually those smaller interactions are just as important in learning about the people.
How do you, I really like the idea that you leverage, sort of, you describe the medical team within a coaching environment, because naturally they do have a different relationship, don't they? They're not making selection. They're not out on the grass. They are treatment table where one's already vulnerable. Like, I wonder if there's a way you can project onto that. I'd imagine there is that kind of vulnerability you already feel being in that space, that you then allow that to come out in conversation. But they're probably fairly recognized and established ways in which you can gain more of a 360-degree insight to players, athletes. I wonder how that works with professionals beyond trying to have multiple conversations. That will probably be beyond you as an assistant head co-curricular. So I wonder who's out there, who's the multidisciplinary team that's out there that can help you in the same way? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the current position, and you have the professional means of that conversation via PDR, but as we would both recognise, that's not a conversation that all colleagues will feel really open to divulge what their feelings are.
This is a brief pause in today's crafted conversation to talk about how the crafted concept, the overarching business that supports the crafted conversation, both in newsletter and in podcast form, can best support you in your performance environments. The crafted concept has experience working in the education and elite sports sectors through performance coaching for individuals or for teams, the learning environment, by focusing on those three pillars of the crafted concept of performance: learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly because I can help you, as I have done on many occasions, developing a sense of cohesion within the team. Performance coaching aims to drive individuals and teams to excel. And as a performance coach, I am an expert in areas of teaching and learning, instructional design, motivational psychology, team development, performance culture and environment, and performance mindset. It's my job to generate activities, use questioning, listening, observing, probing techniques to deliberately seek feedback and present opportunities for lateral thinking and inspire growth and ideas for you as an individual or for the performance of the team and the collective. The crafted concept is your accountability partner, is your critical observer. I'm able to draw upon experiences as an expert teacher and instructor, and as an expertly qualified executive coach, performance coach with over 100 hours worth of coaching experience. As a coach developer in elite sport, I can support and guide coaches through the complexities of your professional development, of your professional environment, offering structure and assisting you in refining your skills through learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly, marcus@thecraftedconcept.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn, Marcus Sharrod.
Pairing up members of the department that you can have the conversation about their friend. So, I've got staff member X and staff Y. I want to find out about how things are for staff X, so I ask staff Y, because they are able to have that separation from a leadership position to a friendship position.
Mm.
And actually, I'd probably say, that's where we got to know each other so well 10 years ago. Well, it's 10 years since you left, but, all those years prior to that was because ultimately we were rubbing shoulders together, working out in the gym, going on tour together, going to fixtures together. So you immediately built those relationships. And I suppose, therefore, from a leadership point of view, it's being able to tap into that information from others, where it's an alternative source to the individual themselves that you're trying to speak to. Now, for the next role, that's going to be a really interesting one, because, is there a natural suspicion of the next layer up? For me, I think I really try and work with authenticity in everything that I do, and I'd hope that my colleagues would see that as part of me. And therefore, the support I'm looking to try and give my colleagues next year and moving forward is only going to be from an authentic start point, an open door policy of listening, understanding, trying to support wherever I can, but also being respectful that there are things that I probably won't be able to help with, and actually navigating that path in a sensitive way. That's probably the narrative that's the hard one, because you want to support people fundamentally, and that's what I started this off by citing. But knowing that there will be times that you're not able to say yes to somebody or find them that immediate solution. So yeah, that's the challenge that waits ahead.
Yeah, for sure. How well prepared are you for those things as a result of your coaching background? What is it that elite sport can bring to the leadership positions in a professional environment that support us being able to do the harder things, have the difficult conversations, say no to people?
Yeah, I think from a playing perspective was the starting point, because there are times that you've been on the receiving end of those difficult conversations, vis-a-vis you've been selected, you haven't been selected, you're playing well, you're not playing well, and not taking those personally. So being able to recognize that you respect the person who you're receiving feedback from, and you're then able to transfer that forward into the way that you want to act. So I think that's probably going to be part of this process moving forward, is, can I take those snippets of experience of being on the receiving end of difficult conversations to support people moving forward from a position of empathy, from a position of understanding, transparency, consistency, all the things that hopefully will be part of what this position looks like, and from a really honest point of view. So what are the best parts of sport into this? Absolutely working as part of a team, and that I think was one of the parts I made reference to in my interview, was that yes, I'm applying for a role in itself, but also to be part of a senior leadership team, and that really excites me. Learning the wider skill set of that echelon of school, the decision makers, and actually the problem solvers. Coaching is a big part of preparation, but then also problem solving on the hoof. And I think, I reflect back on what are the experiences I've garnered over the last 2 and a bit years in this role. It's absolutely been able to make those decisions quickly, but from an informed point of view. And to a degree, the better you can be prepared to make those difficult decisions by the work you've done in advance, the more the smoother that transition is. And actually the support that you get from your colleagues is far greater, because they feel that it's a considered, measured approach rather than flying by the seat of your pants and reactive. So I hope that brings together part of what you were saying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you captured that kind of like team essence, team dynamic of being involved in team sports, rugby being yours. But essentially I always frame this. It's interesting. I bring it into my own work, both in school and through the crafted concept is my start point for anything that I've achieved in my professional life is that I failed at football. That's the only reason that I'm still here talking to you. It's the only reason we met is because I didn't become a professional footballer. So my whole adult life, its pre-frame was, you're not good enough, pal, or you didn't have the right mental tools at the time. You didn't have what it required at that time for you. And I think it's quite an empowering lens to have. And that is, there's a classic adage, isn't there, that PE teachers make great leaders. And you see that with a range of schools that I work with in the independent sector, in the maintained sector. Lots of physical education teachers go on to leadership roles. And I think that's probably a long way towards why it is. There's obviously the team element, but, a maths department are a team. But we've been a team where if an element fails, then you're screwed. If someone comes up too quick in your defensive line, you're getting someone off your shoulder and you're screwed. I do wonder if we're cognizant enough, aware enough of that as essentially failed sportsmen. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, and failure is such a big part of growth. Again, it's a simple adage to consider. In an educational environment, how often are we happy and prepared for children to fail? We're currently now in an internal exam week, and I know that the kids will be having prepared well over half term and so on and so forth, but are they going to be judging their ability by their successes, or are they going to then judge their potential growth by the failures? Go back to that idea of us both training in the gym, the little spit and sawdust thing we had at the time. You only ever get bigger by failing when you're lifting, because otherwise you'd still be lifting. So there's a great community of schools in New York, and they have a failure week.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah.
And I just think that's such a great approach to have, to rid the shackles of, I can't get something wrong, to actually be in a position where you feel comfortable making mistakes. And, I love, there's a little coaching practice I remember doing a few years back, and I love this sort of guided discovery to finding an answer. So I used to do a little practice. It was an attacking attacking visualization practice, where the defense would be predetermined to do a particular thing. And I'd speak to the defenders beforehand and basically say to them, you're in a flat 4 defensively, and what I want is number 3 to shoot out the line. I want number 2 to fall on the floor and do a press up, and I want number 4 just to run really wide. And basically the attack would have 6 reps, and the defense would do exactly the same each time. And it was that repetition of, can I recognize where a failure took place, maybe in our attack, or where a failure occurred within their defense that gives us an opportunity. And you'd have the conversation, well, who are the best players to see what went wrong there, or what happened? Because invariably the first time you see that defense come at you, you've tried some Hail Mary pass over the top and it's gone into touch, whatever. So your blindside wing or your fullback, somebody who's in that position slightly off the front, that immediate decision making, has the ability to see. So in a roundabout way, I think that ability to have repetition without repetition in so many different parts of life are real opportunities for growth. Particularly if you can either have the ability to step back and review it yourself, or even better, have somebody else to review and then tell you what they saw. I've never really thought of it from a professional guidance point of view in terms of with colleagues, but I think that might be an interesting one to tease out. Maybe that's a crafted concept for down the line.
Well, it's funny you say that as you're describing it. You're essentially you really explicitly and really thoughtfully thought about the learning design of that training session to gain, like you say, without it being drill and kill. You've got your sense of deliberate practice, but also a mental awareness of being able to scan, see what's in front of you, and adapt. Well, the best way as you were describing it, was thinking about how I'd apply that to the education environment is when I observe colleagues teach, or having had a number of PGCE students, which is a trainee teacher for the uninitiated, come through my department in the 10 years that I've run it. 9 years that I've run it. That sense of, Marcus is coming in, I'm going to give him my best. I'm going to go. You're smiling because you'll know that sense of like. In fact, I remember getting this feedback from Paul Morris as my director of sport in my first year teaching, where I delivered this crazy lesson, this basketball lesson. And it was all bells and whistles and everything was going on, and there were handouts and there was this and that. And he sat me down, and I'll never forget it. And he went, "What a load of flipping fanfare that was." Well, you can imagine what he actually said. And it's right. It's that sense of actually just do your normal and be yourself and make your mistakes and be as authentic as possible, so that I can give you the most actionable and authentic feedback as possible. Spot something in a nuance in the way that you deliver your instruction, be that as a football coach, a rugby coach, a tennis coach, or as a teacher, and actually give you something really pertinent that you can work on.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, mate. And I'm gonna turn the table slightly from your wonderful introduction and actually reflect on a memory that I have of you in your first few weeks at the school, because the moral to this, or the sort of the takeaway, is being able to back yourself to do something by being motivated to do it and actually throwing yourself through it. So I remember this must have been the first half term at the school, and you were taking the under 13s at the time.
Yeah.
So we walked down the sports hall corridor and you said, "Mako, I've got a parent I just need to see outside. Would you be able to sit in on this conversation with the parent just so I can check that I'm okay?"
Right.
And I can remember exactly the parent. The initials of the people were OP. And quite literally, I didn't have to say a word, because you just nailed it. You got it straight away because you'd prepared and you knew your background. You knew what you wanted to get out of the conversation with the parent, and you almost had your non-negotiables that were there, that were articulately put forward. And this was somebody, at the time, ECT, and that's why you wanted that support. And one of the things I really hoped taken away from that was you felt empowered on the back of that conversation to have a colleague who you sort of respected. I was head of rugby at the time, actually give you the thumbs up to say, "Mate, that was absolutely spot on." And sometimes one of the best ways of us supporting that growth is not by telling somebody how to do it, but watching, listening, empowering them to have a go, and ultimately then being able to give that positive reinforcement afterwards to say, "Absolutely spot on." And you won't remember who the pupil is or who the parent is because it's so many years ago, but it was such a reassuring moment to say, "Yeah, we've got a good one here." Unfortunately, there's only a couple of years that you're able to stay with us.
Yeah. Maternity covers, wasn't it? I got lucky to stay a second year. I think that's one thing that concerns me most, actually, with my kind of coaching and mentoring qualification sort of hat on, executive coach, performance coaching, whatever you want to call it, is how often and how misguided leaders are in offering feedback through their lens. Because if anything, that's disempowering. You're removing someone's agency by projecting and saying, "This is how I would have dealt with that situation." And I think, I would implore anyone who's in that kind of observation, feedback, learning, critique position to start with a question.
Yeah. Tell me why. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you
Tell me how it felt. What did you think? And I know that's something that would resonate with you. How do you see that working when it's someone who take them. I suppose the best metaphor we can apply is in their PE kit, a PE teacher in their kit as you are now, doing your thing in the uniform that says this is what we do. We're PE teachers. How's that going to play out when it's the head of music, the head of drama, CCF, as you say, the head of faith? It's the geography teacher who does the 14 C's that just doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to come out. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I actually think it's going to be a real strength for the role next year that I won't know the answers to the head of music, the head of drama in terms of what they're doing and so on. And actually, when I did the level 4, one of the best learning journeys we had through that course was doing a coaching session with a Super League netballer.
Brilliant.
So it was all about asking questions because I couldn't tell her what to do or how to do it. So that you were in groups of 3. One was recording it, one was writing down the questions that you wrote, and then the third was actually delivering the session. So we weren't prepared for it at all. We didn't know that this was going to be taking place. We were literally thrown in at the deep end at Nottingham Uni, and you're there working one-to-one with a Super League player, and it was brilliant because it took away that notion of tell.
Yeah.
And that fundamentally is what next year's role is about. I'm not going to be able to tell the head of drama how to run a production. What I'm going to be able to help them with is finding out how they felt a production went. Were there any things that, from a logistics point of view that were problematic that I could support with? Were there any, staffing constraints that made it difficult, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm really looking forward to that because it's taking me away from tell. And I don't think I'm a tell person necessarily within my leadership style. I'm very much, I want to find out from others and then guide and support, because as you quite rightly say, if you're telling them how you think something should be done, then that's only through your lens. And the growth you get, the greatest growth you get from colleagues and pupils is allowing them to find their solutions, but with a scaffold around it that is necessary to whatever that situation may be.
Just sort of lead with curiosity and inquisitiveness, and so you're saying you'd be quite happy to be quite openly unknowing, vulnerable in that environment, when you go into, when you're in the drama department, when you're in the music department?
Yeah, I think that there are going to be certain facets to the role which have to be me telling. And, case in example might be you're looking at a particular date for something to take place, or you've got a risk assessment to do for an excursion, for a trip. Those are policies, procedures, etc. But actually being able to, go and support the practices, the rehearsals, as opposed to just going and supporting the event itself, will be such an eye-opener for me. And I hope it will be recognized that this isn't about a tick box and a showing up and a showing face. This is actually investing that intent to support colleagues and help them, find their best ways of doing things. And ultimately the pupils getting the best possible learning environment and experience that they can. So those are the bits I'm really looking forward to, because it's taking me out of my comfort zone. Absolutely. You get the role and there's a little bit of imposter syndrome that starts there, thinking, am I going to do this, etc., etc. And I actually got the role around Feb half term. So, starting in September, there's quite a long lead in to preparing and handover and so on. But also that provides opportunities to start developing those relationships with those key stakeholders who I'll be working most closely with, without stepping on the toes of the person doing that role at the moment. So it's going to be fascinating. I'd love to see in 12 months time what it felt like, what the learning was personally, what things went right, what things went wrong. Because I'm sure I'll have very different answers for certain parts of what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. How are you going to get your rugby fix?
Well, I'll still be involved with coaching. I think my timetable most likely is going to be games heavy. I probably
Mm.
won't have that much in the way of PE teaching, possibly not academic teaching. Still yet to put that together. That's going to be sort of in this next week. So being out on the field will still be there for me. I still expect to work every Saturday, supporting Rich with the first 15.
Mm.
Um, and it's strange, and I know you're going to come on to this sort of at the ending, but in terms of like my journey to get the England counties role was all about what's the next step that helps me be the best candidate possible for that role. So the level 4 was absolutely a critical part of that because it gave me the credibility to be a viable applicant. But
Mm.
also that's on the back of having coached the North for 5 years, and seen these players come through and so on and so on. Um, but almost overnight, when COVID hit and the England counties program was going to stop or be suspended, um, it then took on a very different sort of mindset for me, and then getting the DOS role meant that my hands-on rugby was diminishing.
Mm.
This new role is going to exacerbate that even further. I think what it just has it's helped me recognize that my world was about rugby for a long time, and I loved that.
Mm.
But actually,
Mm.
I'm really looking forward to what the next part of the journey will be, where my world doesn't revolve around rugby, but actually a much wider domain. And I think it also it's I've reflected on this that if the England counties role was to come back next year, I don't think I'd be right for it now
Mm.
because I've lost that investment that I think is necessary to give the players what they would need at that level. I'd still be able to coach a good session. That's not a consideration. But am I as up to date and current now as I was 5 years ago in relation to where the game was and
Mm.
the cutting edge of it? I don't think I would be.
Mm. So really, it's an incredibly self-aware, reflexive thing that you've just described there to a level that you probably don't even recognize. And I know you well, and I know the level of empathy that you bring to everything that you do and how thoughtful you are in what you do. I think if we could package even 10-20% of what you've just demonstrated there and put it into a workforce, then would be the world would be a better place. Like how many, certainly in our world, teaching, and actually where our world then crosses over into elite sport, the amount of people whose entire identity is woven in the way that they deliver their practice, their instruction, to the detriment of their own growth is really quite scary, I find. Um, what allows you to kind of think like that, Mako? Because and I suppose for listeners, for me to give that an even greater frame, when I was at GSAL and you were head of rugby, it was like this guy could go on and coach in the Premiership. Like he's that good and that motivated and that obsessed by the game. Like not upset, not in a bad way, but just you lived and breathed the game. So for
Mm.
me, who remembers you as that, I find it incredible really to hear you reflect in that way and to be excited for the future, to acknowledge the past and be excited for the future in such a flexible way. Yeah, where's that come from?
I think I've always been a pretty self-aware person, and maybe it goes back to being a failed rugby player myself. You know, we those who can't teach, blah blah blah, all those sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
idioms that you talk about. But yeah, you're right. Every role that I've had at school, I've given everything to, and my focus has been centered around trying to be the best that I could be in that role for the people I work with and for myself. And recognizing that my life is taking a different path now to where it was has meant I've needed to pick up the mirror and have a bit of a look and find out what are the ingredients to a successful John McKenzie moving forward. So that certainly happened when I took on the DOS role, because all of a sudden you're caring for the people and the structures around every sport rather than just focusing on one. And I think I was always that way inclined anyway. I wasn't the person who only focused on rugby and didn't have an appreciation for where football, netball, hockey, cricket, etc. came in. But actually, going into that DOS role, you're having to convince any naysayers that this is somebody who is more than just rugby.
Yeah.
And
I suppose into the new role, someone who's more than just sport.
Correct. And again, that's something I feel excited by the prospect of, because I know in my heart, with authenticity, I can demonstrate that, not just for the sake of it, but I can demonstrate it with real honesty and compassion. And so those are the bits that I am excited with, without a shadow of a doubt. I guess when you go back to that self-reflection bit, it's being able to recognize that there's a necessary change of emphasis in order to be successful in whatever the next thing is. So it's almost a bit like a graphic equalizer. If everything's up at full blast, you're stretching yourself too thin. So you need to be able to adjust the button one way in one area and then one way in another area. So for me, yes, if I looked at all the areas of the co-curriculum on a level playing field, sport can probably reduce, knowing that I know that, in order for my understanding and support of other areas to enhance. And being 100% prepared to do that has meant that I've been able to almost do an internal 360 and say, what do I need to do to help me move forward? And yeah, with that England counties mindset, what would I have needed to have had as my balance to have been the best possible coach for that program? It wouldn't have been doing the role I'm doing at the moment. So therefore, to be up to date and to be current with coaching, which is such a dynamic area, I think you have to live and breathe it. And as soon as you step back from that doesn't mean that you're neglecting your own growth, but it's only going to level the amount that you can put into a particular area. So yeah, that goes back to that notion in my mind that yes, I could coach a good session to an England team, not a problem there. But would I be? I'm not currently living and breathing it sufficiently to be the right person for that role moving forward. Which I say with a heavy heart, because it was such a big part of my life for 20 years to get to that position. But I'm really comfortable with that. You know.
Again, it's interesting, isn't it? That kind of sense of when you've lived in quite an elite way from such a young age as we have, having played our sports at the levels that we did, and then experience that failure that ultimately sets you on your next path. It's quite interesting how, I wonder whether that kind of flexibility to acknowledge and welcome and accept, as you just described, 20 years of your life, it's not with regret, it's with gratitude. It's like, that was amazing, I gained so much from it, and it's given me the platform by which I can go and achieve the next thing.
I think the irony, mate, is if COVID hadn't happened, I'd have kept on that rugby path. I would have hopefully had 4 good years, and I'd have finished last year.
Yeah.
And I'd then be thinking, okay, what's next?
What's next? Yeah.
And I know that a life in professional rugby, from a coaching point of view, wasn't something I wanted to look towards. So it would have been unknowns. Within education, what would have been the next step? Would I have been where I am now? Probably not, because I think, I've needed the tools of being a DOS for 2 and a bit years to put myself in the frame for this role. I reflected massively between, even reading my letter of application 3 years ago when I first went for the co-curricular role to then doing it this time, and actually I was making emphasis of, well, this is what I did with England counties or with the North, and I'm thinking that has nothing in comparison to the experiences of doing this job. So it's definitely provided the stepping stones and the leadership capabilities, I would say, to then be the right person for the role now.
And you're someone who's never been afraid to get things wrong, stick your neck out, be vulnerable, make mistakes, learn from them. And it's interesting, isn't it, how you can go from 3 years ago putting an application in that you would have felt in a strong position to achieve and to be successful with, and then go back having done all those things for 3 years and made those big kind of decisions around the rugby and around what the next kind of what your trajectory looks like, to then go, wow, that letter of application was nowhere near it. I think it's far too easy, essentially capturing what the intersection between our environment, how we design our learning, and how we're critical and how we accept critique. Is to be a crafted individual takes work, and it's work that not enough people do.
I think just while you were saying that, crafting your failures is something that's really important.
Love that.
And I wonder to what extent the impact of a catastrophic failure versus a controlled failure, and what impact that has on growth professionally as an adult versus growth as a child. It just really made me sort of think, failures that I have experienced have tended to have been probably on the back of having really given something a good go, but you weren't quite good enough for it. So I use that example of applying for a role that, you put your all into, but you weren't quite good enough for. That's almost a crafted failure that is within a control, as opposed to, I've just tried something for the first time and it's gone horribly wrong. I've fallen off the ski lift, whatever that might be, which do you get the greater learning from, I wonder?
Yeah.
And nobody likes to fail, but it's such an important part of what they need to do to move forward.
Yeah. My eldest is 7, year 2 at school. You can really visibly see it, actually. My wife and I reflect on how she's hitting that sort of stage 2 Piaget, a bit more theory of mind, and awareness of where she sits and how she's being perceived. It's really interesting to see that versus the up to that point with my boys, and with her still in many ways, that just go for it. Like, no one cares if I go down in flames, it doesn't matter. It's the more we can hold on to that childish sort of freedom, I suppose, and just sense of curiosity, the better. Even if it means you have to hold a mirror up to yourself and it's not always great.
Yeah, I love the way you look at youngsters play tennis and play golf.
Yeah.
And they absolutely rip it, don't they?
Yeah.
Everything into it, as opposed to, it's that whole, do I need to win or do I need to avoid failure here? Am I just going to get the ball back over the net, or am I going to absolutely back myself to rip it? And that's such a healthy viewpoint for children to grow from, I'm sure.
Yeah. Do you know what? I hope he listens to this. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But Knowlesy, I'll speak to you directly, because that's you on a squash court, just keeping it, or like, just keep it on the island. Make me run around all day long as a 20-something-year-old to 11, 12 years ago. Keep it on the island, safety first. Know that I just go for it and screw it up. Can't stand that approach. Maka, to finish off, I feel like you may have skated over this slightly, but so don't feel free to not fully repeat yourself and just summarize, or you might have something else in mind. But I'm interested to know, as I am with all my guests, what have you changed your mind about most to do with either your learning environment, how you cultivate that identity, the learning design around planning and curriculum and kind of like when you're assessing, when you're monitoring, or critique of feedback and review and kind of reflection? What have you changed your mind about most recently?
I think probably the biggest change has been going from a child-centered approach to a colleague-centered approach because of the nature of the role and what were the requirements of that. And I think just feeling comfortable that it's healthy to recalibrate from time to time, and whether that's recalibrating in the same role or recalibrating to a new role, understanding what the requirements are and then doing your due diligence, finding out what the requirements are, who you're going to be working with, know the individual first and foremost. And yeah, just feeling confident that a change in direction where you put your all behind it is only ever going to be healthy. Whereas a half-hearted approach is going to be nuanced with uncertainty. So yeah, I use that notion of, you've got that imposter syndrome, but that's only temporary. And you also have to recognize that you're put in a role for a reason because other people see the good in you. So feeling, and that, if I'm talking about that from a DOS to an SLT role, or I'm talking about that from an under 12 player coming off the bench to play, you're given a go because somebody thinks you're good enough. And so being able to translate that and feel confident and comfortable with it, I think has probably been a big learning change for me.
Yeah, such a positive way of looking at it. And ultimately, others don't put their hat in the ring because they're not willing to either do the work, do the reflection, be in a difficult position, and it's easier to just sit in the stalls. Yeah, I really admire that. I really admire the journey that you've been on, Macca. It's been brilliant having you on and you sharing so much with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Great stuff. Thank you.